I'm Joan Lewis, and this is Rome Dispatch. Welcome back to Rome Dispatch. It's been a while since we've been in touch, but if there's a big event in Rome, EWTN and yours truly are going to bring it to you. And of course, we're coming from Rome because of the big canonization on Sunday, the canonization of two saints. So the church has two saints, two new saints. And by the way, 80 popes before today, before Sunday's canonization, have been canonized. So with John the 23rd and John Paul II, we will have 82 popes who will have been canonized in the history of the church. Now, a little trivia about Sunday's canonization. We have Pope Francis canonizing John the 23rd and John Paul, but it was John Paul who beatified John the 23rd. See if you can kind of wrap your head around that fact. Now, what's interesting for me personally in all of this is that I've been in Rome for 35 years. 33 of those years I've either worked for or covered the Vatican. And in that period, I have been in the presence of 5 popes and spoken to 4 popes. Now, the first pope I ever was in the presence of but did not speak to was John the 23rd. And that was in 1961. You can see the photo that I took with my little brownie camera and found only a few years ago. He was carried into the hall, as you can see, on the sedia gestatoria it was called. There were 6 or 8 chair bearers, and it was a very thrilling thing, as it's thrilling for any of you when you come to Rome today. You're in the presence of Pope Francis. They're unforgettable moments. And then, 1961, March 22nd to be precise, there were not as many people that came to Rome on pilgrimage. There weren't as many public events for people to be in the presence of a pope. So it was an honor and a joy, and the fact that in 48 hours, this man, this roly-poly, as he's been called, pontiff, of great warmth and humanity, who seemed like a grandfather when I saw him that day as a student, this man will become a saint and a model for all of us. And to me, what's also important, and it probably is for you, is the fact, when you say saint, you might think of St. Francis, St. Anthony, St. Clare, St. Benedict, St. Catherine, so many of them. But St. Joseph, we're talking hundreds of years ago they died, maybe a millennia, maybe 2 millennia. But now, Sunday, we have 2 popes, 2 men who are part of our lifetime. Maybe a senior citizen will know more about John the 23rd, but what I want to do today is make John very much alive for you. So you saw the pictures of the audience hall, by the way. There was no Paul VI audience hall that day, so the audiences were held in the Hall of Blessings. And that's that huge room where the 5 balconies are on St. Peter's Basilica above the atrium. Behind those curtained windows is the Hall of Blessing, and that's where that March 1961 audience took place. But I was privileged in later years, when I worked for the Holy See. In 1996, I was part of a Holy See delegation to a conference in Istanbul, Turkey. And the then nuncio, Archbishop Pierluigi Celata, invited the delegation for dinner to the Casa Roncalli. Remember, John's baptismal name was Angelo Roncalli. Now, the house he lived in as nuncio, because remember, he was more than a simple pastor. He was briefly a military chaplain, a bishop, archbishop, and nuncio in Bulgaria, Turkey, and then, of course, in Paris. I don't know which place he was more famous in or more loved in. But in Istanbul, at the Casa Roncalli, we had the nuncio offered us a dinner party. And so some of the pictures that I took that long ago evening, 1996, for the delegation, show the building, Casa Roncalli. Nothing has been changed since John the 23rd left the nunciature in 1944. So in these pictures, you will see the damask-covered walls, the heavy drapes, the furniture. You will see the carpets, and of course, you'll see part of the delegation. as we stand there. So all of that has remained the same. Nobody wanted to change it, and interestingly enough, one of the last places we visited before everybody went upstairs for an after-dinner cordial, you had to pass the chapel on the way upstairs after the dinner hour. And again, nothing was changed here. We were allowed to pray, but we could not move a prayer book because all had been the same. So those were wonderful, remarkable years for John. Not Pope John at that time, but he created wonderful relationships with Muslims. And in all of his years as nuncio, wonderful relations with Jews as well. So we go all the way back to 1958 to 63 when he died. Those 4.5, almost 5 years of an enormously important papacy, a very human one, and one filled with humor, as we will see in a while. Now, I was blessed to visit a couple months ago the birthplace of John XXIII, of Angelo Roncalli. He was born not too far from Bergamo, a beautiful city in northern Italy. He was born at Sotto il Monte, which means under the mountain. And I took some video, it's just with my iPad, but I took some video, which you're going to see on your screen right now, and I'll kind of walk you through it. As you come in off the street, about a block from where he was baptized, we walk through what looks like a tunnel, and we will be in a courtyard in a very short moment. Now, the building may look large, but one thing you have to know about the Roncalli family, little Angelo was the 4th of 13 children. And so they needed a big house, other relatives lived with them. A total of 30 people lived. When I get in the courtyard in a minute, you will see me pan to some of the upper levels, and a total of 30 people lived in this area. Now, his dad, his uncles, Uncle Zaverio, who was very much an influence on little Angelo in his prayer life, and actually probably didn't know it at the time, but was leading him into the priesthood. So here's another sign you see indicating some of the rooms. Stanza Natali means the birth room where John XXIII, Angelo Roncalli, was born. Now we're in the courtyard, and you will see in a minute some pictures of some of the farm implements. On the lower level at that time were all the public rooms, in the sense of the kitchen, the dining room, and everything had to be big, because you had a family, as I say, with the extended relatives of 30 people. And it was this family atmosphere, always being surrounded by people, that made John, as Pope, as nuncio, as bishop, what he was. A man who loved family, he loved children, he loved being with people, sharing meals with people. He could not eat alone when he was Pope. His predecessor, that's all he wanted, Pius XII, to have this quiet time for himself. John loved noise and people and laughter. And you can, again, see how big the house was there. You can see some of the farm implements that are still there that they used at the time. But it was the very humility and poverty of John's background that stayed with him his entire life. We think of Pope Francis as being very dedicated to the poor people. Oh, here's a beautiful set of sculptures that you see a statue of John as he is greeting and spending time with farmers. It's a very moving sculpture. And in a minute, I'll actually go upstairs. We'll see the room that he was born in. But you know, it's important to go to these roots. We can't always do this with the saints that died 300, 400, 500 years ago. But here's a man, a humble, very human person, great sense of humor, who acceded to the papacy and brought all of those important traits of his roots with him. Sharing, that was a very important thing for this Pope, was sharing. He had so many brothers and sisters, you couldn't possibly sit down at a dinner table and not share. And I have to tell you just a little anecdote. He was always called Angelino, or Little Angelo. When he was elected to the papacy in October of 1958, one of his brothers said, You know, we've had so many priests here in Sotto il Monte that the odds were that one day one of them would become a pope. And one of his sisters said, "My word, little Angelo has become the pope." So an amazing period of growing up, of humble, wonderful roots that never ever changed for this pope. That's important to remember. Now, the video you're looking at now is from the upper floor where all the bedrooms were, and that says that this is the room in which he was born on November 25th, 1881. And a very humble room. You will see a bed, the original bed that he was in there, because the children were obviously always born at home. And what's very interesting about the early years, if there's any family pictures, they were pictures that somebody else took of the Roncalli family, because Cardinal Capovilla told me that the Pope's family was so poor they couldn't afford a camera. So there were no pictures. There's the bedroom. You do see a picture of his parents there. Obviously when he became Pope, another picture. And the bed, they've simply taken the mattress out and compressed the foot and head part of the bed, which you'll see again in a moment. So, but it's just very exciting to go back and just touch a piece of furniture in a room that a Pope lived in, that he played in as a child. Very, very, very moving experience. I also visited, but don't have for today's show, I do have videos of Bergamo where he studied, the library, which is under renovation right now, where he spent a lot of time studying as a student. And actually, John lived quite some length from school. He had to have scholarships for school because the family couldn't afford it, and he had to have scholarships to go to the seminary. One of my great joys when I went to Sotto il Monte, and it was really a surprise for me, Cardinal Capovilla, 98 and a half, was for many years John's secretary as Pope, and then before that as Bishop. Now, Pope Francis named him a cardinal earlier this year, but he did not, just because of age and not liking huge crowds, he did not come to Rome for that period. But instead, Cardinal Angelo Sodano, former Secretary of State, went to Sotto il Monte, and on March 1st, he gave Loris Capovilla the red hat of a cardinal. So I got access to the cardinal's private phone number. I had gone up to Bergamo, and I was with friends of friends, all of whom knew the Roncalli relatives, the whole story of Angelo Roncalli of Capovilla. So I called the cardinal on a Wednesday morning, and I said I was in Bergamo. I told him I'd worked for many years at the Vatican, and I said, you know, I have something in common with you, Your Eminence. I said, I too, years ago, was secretary to a cardinal. He asked me who, he knew him, and so forth. So he said, when are you coming to Sotto il Monte? I said, about 10:15. He said, come immediately here. So we went to Sotto il Monte, spent an hour I treasure with the cardinal. And at a certain point, I took out my iPad and I said, Your Eminence, may I ask several questions of you and video you as you talk? And he said, sure. So basically, in the video, I asked him two questions. One about John the 23rd, if he were to come back today, what would he say to today's world? And then I asked him about children, because we know that John the 23rd loved children. Here you can see the cardinal talking. He didn't have a desk, he had a huge table covered with books. He received many phone calls, but who would guess this man is 98 and a half. And basically, as he was talking, what I heard him say, these are words of an optimist, and he very much in thought was parallel to the man he worked for so many years. And he said that John the 23rd was an optimist. He said he was a man who could and always would hope. And like John, he said John the 23rd taught him to always be himself. And that's what John said the secret was of his years as a diplomat. He was always himself, and he said, I always told the truth. And also John taught him that to stress in life what is good and what unites, because the bad is going to come uninvited. And interestingly enough, the Cardinal often used the words in his talk with us for about an hour, simplicity and prudence. Words which seemed to describe him as he spoke, but also were describing John the 23rd, again, the secret of his success. And he said simplicity and prudence are really the height of Christian virtue. And one other little thing just kind of thrown in, not that there's a direct link in this, but he said when John Paul, something made him think about the moment that John the 23rd was about to die, and his last prayers were in the Bergamo dialect that his mother taught him. But the Cardinal talked about the present, because that's what the Pope always liked to stress. He said, we can look at the past, and we should do so, and always look on the good side of things. But when we look in the present, we also want to look ahead and look forward with optimism. And he said, how do I see the future, Capovilla? He said, it's not mine. I leave that to God with great trust. And that's also what John the 23rd had, great trust in the Lord. And a man very open to service. And the interesting thing about Cardinal Capovilla, you know, here he is 98 and a half. He looks forward to tomorrow as if he was 19 and a half and wants to help create a better world. And he said that's what John the 23rd also wanted to do. And in mentioning children, I said, now, if John the 23rd was in the room with us now and there were 20 little children, because of how he reacted to children, what would he say? In fact, John was known for his speech known as his speech to the moon, but in which he told people the night after the opening of Vatican Council II, he told people to go home and caress their children and tell them this was from the Pope. And he said, what would John say to children today? Cardinal Capovilla said he would exult in seeing the progress made in caring for them, in defending them, and in educating them. He said he would also be aware of the many tragic situations with children in families and societies. He knows that there's children that are forced to become young soldiers, to flee as refugees, and so forth. But he was always the optimist, as John was. So there you have some of my visit to Sotto il Monte. And we have some more video afterwards and a guest, but we are going to take a little break for the moment. But come back and join us. Well, welcome back to Rome Dispatch, and someone you know very well, Mary Shevlin. She's here with us today because she has prepared a wonderful, actually a series of documentaries all related to John the 23rd. So you want to tell us what you're going to offer us now, Mary?
Joan, thanks so much for having me. EWTN had the great idea, let's make something fresh on John the 23rd, because two popes being canonized together, well, John Paul was such an immediate sensation, he's so fresh in our minds, but maybe John the 23rd wasn't. So the idea was, let's make something fresh. So like you, blazed a trail to Sotto il Monte, went up there, spoke with some of the Roncalli family. So we have an interview with Marco Roncalli in the documentary called John the 23rd, the Saint. We speak to Archbishop de Noia, we speak to Cardinal Tauron, Cardinal Capovilla also participated. But I just wanted to show you a clip, if you don't mind, just of the Archbishop de Noia, what he had to say about, of course, he's the Pope of the Council. So John the 23rd's great desire with this council, what he wanted to accomplish, again, you know, fulfilling the work of Vatican I.
Excellent.
And let's hear what he has to say, and we talk more about it.
He made it clear that he wanted to complete the work of the First Vatican Council, especially in the area of ecclesiology. So you might say that one of the principal themes then of this council became the theology of the Church. And then the second was the role of the bishop. He wanted that, he felt, had been neglected by Vatican I, not deliberately, but they did many things there, but they didn't spend too much time on the theology of the bishops. So, and then of course he wanted to, he did want to affirm a more positive attitude on the part of the Church to what we'd say, the culture, Western culture. There was a certain, I suppose he sensed a certain, he was a very open man. The council was an immense event, and had many effects over a period of 50 years. I would say that the lasting effects of the council have been, you know, real, and so they've continued. We do have a whole new emphasis on ecclesiology. The bishop's role is, no one ever spoke about collegiality before the council. I think he thought that he was moving the Church into a more, as I said, a more positive relationship with the culture, but he would have thought, to use Pope Benedict's phrase, that what was happening there was in continuity with the tradition. He would have been appalled by the people who saw Vatican II as a break or rupture. It would never, you know, I mean, he was a very traditional man. He is the first pope, really, to have begun to use the word evangelization. That used to be associated, the word evangelization or evangelical was associated with Protestants. Catholics, in fact, the Congregation for Evangelization now was then called Propaganda Fide. So, but in France, reading the French theologians, he was captivated by this idea that what was really needed was a kind of re-evangelization. So this is probably his most important magisterial contribution, because that was taken up by Paul VI, and then of course John Paul II, who began to speak about the new evangelization and really jump-started a movement for proclaiming the gospel, for seeing the church in mission, which was a great theme of the Second Vatican Council. But it was really John the 23rd, however, who sounded that theme, and it may well be that the council, the inspiration for the council wasn't simply aggiornamento, you know, in the sense of catching up with the times, but making the Church a more effective instrument of evangelization and mission, which perhaps was a little bit restrained by the various sort of formality that surrounded the Pope, and you know, he wanted to loosen that up a bit, you know, and I think it wasn't simply a negative, I think it was a positive to effectively evangelize.
Well, that was a fascinating documentary. That and others like it are airing these days and even in the next week on EWTN, so stay tuned. But you know, we need another half hour just for John the 23rd's comments. Right. Like Vatican Council II, the cardinals came to him and said, Your Holiness, there's no way we can have a council by 1963. And he said, okay, we're going to open it in 1962. So a great man with a great sense of humor. And we've just touched the surface today of this Pope who used to go in the city of Rome like Francis, and the media dubbed him Johnny Walker. So our brief look at one of Sunday's new saints, our very beloved, and a lot of us were lucky to be in his presence, John the 23rd, soon to be St. John the 23rd. And you'll be with us Sunday for that canonization.